Chris is a family man with a wife and a young son. Every day he works as a medical equipment salesman, selling a bulky machine designed to scan bone density. This machine is the only thing standing between his family and financial collapse. Chris and his wife Linda pour all of their savings into this device. It produces images twice as sharp as traditional X-rays, but it also costs several times more. At the time, it is considered a groundbreaking invention. Believing in its future, they decide to become the sole distributors in their area and buy a large number of units to resell. What they do not realize is that most doctors and hospitals do not yet see the machine as a necessity. As a result, their decision quickly destroys their financial stability. Chris needs to sell at least 2 machines every month just to survive and pay the bills. Yet selling even 1 unit feels nearly impossible. He begins going door to door, pitching the machine to private clinics and hospitals. Before starting his sales rounds each day, Chris drops off his son, Christopher, at a daycare in Chinatown. Christopher has to stay there because Linda also works, trying to patch up their finances as sales continue to fail. Chris does own a car, but parking near hospitals is nearly impossible. Ticket after ticket piles up until the car is eventually towed away. To get it back, he needs to sell at least 1 machine. One evening during dinner, Chris notices a Rubik's Cube sitting on the sink. Linda explains that it is a birthday gift for Christopher from one of his friends. That year, the Rubik's Cube has become a cultural sensation, talked about everywhere. Later that night, Linda asks whether Chris has paid their taxes. He admits that he cannot afford to pay them this month and hopes he can cover them next month if a machine finally sells. The answer only makes things worse. Their finances are already in bad shape, and Linda has been forced to work double shifts just to keep food on the table. This is the moment when his fight for a better life truly begins. This is the pursuit of happiness.
You want something, go get it.
One morning, while heading out to sell again, Chris sees a man driving a sleek sports car. Curious, he asks what the man does for a living and how he became so successful. The answer sticks in Chris's mind. The man works as a stockbroker and explains that the job requires strong math skills and the ability to connect with people. From that moment on, Chris cannot stop thinking about becoming a stockbroker, even though he has no idea where to start. On another morning, he tells Linda that after finishing his sales route, he plans to visit a brokerage firm he passed the day before to look for a job. Instead of encouragement, he is met with sarcasm and ridicule. Chris reminds Linda that speaking that way to her husband is unfair. Linda, overwhelmed and exhausted, vents her frustration. Their apartment rent is about to be 3 months overdue, and she has been working non-stop, taking double shifts just so the family can survive. Faced with her anger and stress, Chris finds himself with nothing left to say. After finishing another long day of sales, Chris notices a posting outside a brokerage office, announcing an internship program to become a stockbroker. Without overthinking it, he decides to walk in. Since there is no way to bring a machine the size of a suitcase inside, he makes a careless decision and asks a street performer to watch over it. He even pays $1 to keep it safe. Inside the office, Chris meets a human resources representative and is handed an application form for the internship. While the program is still being explained, his attention drifts outside. He sees the street performer running off with his machine. Panic hits immediately. Chris rushes out and gives chase, but he is too late. The performer disappears onto a train, and just like that, one of his most valuable machines is gone. On the way home, Chris looks over the internship form again. Each month, 20 applicants are accepted into the program, but only one of them will be offered a permanent position. His first challenge is simply making it into that group of 20. With only a high school diploma, Chris knows his chances are slim. He decides to personally hand his application to a man named Jay Twistle in hopes of standing out. The office is hectic, and Jay can do little more than take the form before rushing off. While waiting for any response, Chris continues his work as a medical equipment salesman. One day, on his way to a meeting with a doctor, he spots the same street performer who stole his machine. Without hesitation, he chases her down
It's called running.
and manages to recover the expensive device, finally bringing it back home. That evening, Chris tries to share everything that happened with Linda, but she seems completely worn down and no longer willing to listen. The weight of their situation has pushed her to her limit. A full month passes after Chris submits his application. One day, he runs into Jay again as Jay is about to catch a taxi. Chris reminds him about the application, but Jay is in a hurry and clearly distracted. Thinking fast, Chris mentions that they are heading in the same direction and offers to share the ride. Jay agrees. Inside the taxi, Chris tries to make the most of the moment, talking about his experiences and background. Jay, however, is fully focused on a Rubik's Cube, barely paying attention. Seeing an opportunity, Chris takes the cube and begins working on it. Despite having only a high school education, his strength in math quickly becomes clear. He concentrates intensely, determined to impress. By the time the taxi reaches Jay's home, Chris successfully solves the Rubik's Cube. In that brief moment, he finally manages to capture Jay's attention. Trouble follows soon after. Chris suddenly realizes he never thought about the taxi fare. As the meter keeps running, it becomes clear that the cost is far beyond what he has in his wallet. When the taxi stops at a red light, he panics and runs, trying to avoid paying. A brief chase follows as the driver demands his money. Chris manages to escape, but in the chaos of boarding a train, he leaves the machine behind. Once again, he is forced to let go of something valuable. That incident causes him to arrive home late. He calls Linda only to hear devastating news. She tells him that she and Christopher are leaving because she can no longer endure their financial situation. Chris rushes home, hoping to stop them, but he is too late. Linda has already packed up and left with their son. At the same time, Chris receives a call from Jay. He is invited to attend an interview for the brokerage internship. Thanks to the Rubik's Cube moment, Chris has finally earned a real chance. The next day, emotions boil over as Chris confronts Linda and insists that Christopher will stay with him. Linda blames Chris for dragging both of them into poverty and admits that she is no longer happy. Chris feels completely drained by everything life has thrown at him. He tells Linda to go and stands firm in his decision to keep Christopher with him. That afternoon, he picks up his son from daycare and brings him back home. Not long after, the landlord shows up demanding 3 months of unpaid rent. As always, Chris promises he will find the money. The landlord responds by ordering them to move out the next morning because painters are scheduled to work. Desperate for more time, Chris offers to paint the apartment himself. The landlord agrees and allows him to stay for 1 more week. His problems only continue to stack up. Although he can remain in the apartment, his time is consumed by painting. In the middle of the work, police arrive and arrest Chris for unpaid parking tickets. The rule is simple: pay the fines or go to jail. With no other option, Chris is forced to stay overnight until the verification process is completed. His mind races nonstop. He worries about Christopher, the interview scheduled for the next morning, and the unfinished painting job. There is nothing he can argue. He calls Linda and asks her to take care of Christopher for the night. Fortunately, she agrees to help. Chris spends the night in jail. The next morning, once the paperwork is cleared, he runs as fast as he can to the brokerage office for the interview. There is no time to go home and change clothes. Chris finally arrives at the interview. He meets senior members of the firm wearing clothes that are clearly inappropriate, with paint stains still covering his face. Despite everything, he speaks with confidence and honesty. He openly explains why he looks the way he does. His sincerity fills the room with laughter and leaves a strong impression. When the interview ends, Jay compliments Chris and promises to get back to him with good news. Chris, however, says he needs time to think. This surprises Jay, especially since Chris had been so eager and persistent about getting into the program. The hesitation makes sense once the reality sinks in. The internship offers no salary and no guarantees. Out of 20 interns, only 1 will be chosen for a permanent position. Those who fail are not even allowed to apply to another brokerage for 6 months. It is a brutal rule, but that is the system. Jay waits for Chris to give his answer later that night. That evening, Linda brings Christopher home and explains that she is moving to another city for work. If another emergency happens, she will not be able to help anymore. After saying goodbye to both of them, she leaves. That night, Chris makes his choice. He calls Jay's office and confirms that he will take the internship. Before long, the pressure catches up. Unable to pay rent, Chris and Christopher are forced to move into a motel that costs half as much as their apartment. Even in the middle of the struggle, Chris makes time to be present for his son. While playing basketball together, Christopher talks about becoming a professional player one day. Chris initially responds with caution, explaining how rare it is to become great and encouraging balance in life. Seeing his son grow discouraged, he immediately corrects himself. He reminds Christopher to never let anyone tell him he cannot do something, not even his own father. If he has a dream, he should chase it. Not long after, Chris brings Christopher along on his sales route. That day, he finally manages to sell 1 machine. The money is enough to cover their basic needs for an entire month. Soon, Chris's internship at the brokerage officially begins. He starts learning the fundamentals of becoming a stockbroker. During one lunch break, he steps outside and spots a mentally ill man carrying the machine he lost earlier while fleeing the taxi driver. Chris chases after him, but misfortune strikes again. He is hit by a car while crossing the street and loses one of his shoes. The break turns into another setback, and he returns to the office with only one shoe on. Over time, Chris adapts to the rhythm of the internship. Every day is a race. He must find potential clients and compete with the other interns. For 6 months, all of them fight to secure as many prospects as possible, knowing that only one person will earn the single job, waiting at the end of the program. Because Chris cannot work late like the other interns, he becomes obsessed with efficiency. He stays focused on calling every name on his list without ever putting the phone down. He even avoids drinking too much water so he does not waste time going to the restroom. By doing this, he saves 8 minutes a day. It may sound small, but to someone chasing success in stockbroking, 8 minutes matters. One day, he secures a meeting with a potential client and is given just 20 minutes to arrive at the office. As he is about to leave, his internship supervisor suddenly tells him to move a car. With no choice, Chris complies. That small delay causes him to arrive late to the meeting with Mr. Ribbon. Still, Chris refuses to give up. He knows Mr. Ribbon is planning to watch a football game, so he goes to his house to apologize for missing the appointment. Using the excuse of wanting to watch the game as well, he earns an invitation to join him in a VIP area. Chris uses that moment to build a connection and introduce the financial products offered by the firm where he is interning. Mr. Ribbon is not ready to commit since they have only just met. However, the experience places Chris among wealthy circles, and that alone gives him access to new names and potential leads. For a while, life settles into a routine. Chris lives in a motel, continues his internship, and finally manages to sell all of his remaining medical machines. With that, he has just enough money to stay afloat. Then, everything collapses again. One day, a letter from the tax office arrives. Because he failed to pay his taxes, his bank account is audited, and every dollar inside is seized. In an instant, Chris is broke, left with nothing but a few bills in his wallet. Lost and overwhelmed, he drifts through his days. While spending time with Christopher at a park, he spots the same mentally ill man who once picked up his machine at the station. Chris runs after him and manages to recover the device.
See Jimi Hendrix do that guitar on fire.
Desperate, he rushes around trying to sell it to anyone who will listen. Just as he finds a buyer who shows interest, the machine fails and refuses to turn on. The bad luck does not stop there. When Chris and Christopher return to the motel, they find their belongings left outside. It is a clear sign that they have been kicked out. With nowhere else to go, they end up wandering through a train station. Unsure of what to do next, Chris waits until the station grows quiet. To protect his son from the harsh reality, he turns the moment into a game. He pretends the machine is a time machine, and together they travel to the age of dinosaurs and imagine life as cavemen. Eventually, they enter a public restroom. Using toilet paper as bedding, Chris lays Christopher down to sleep. He knows they cannot stay there forever, so he searches for shelter. He pleads for a place to stay at a social facility, but the manager explains that it only accepts women and children. Christopher is allowed to stay, but Chris is not. Refusing to be separated from his son, he declines the offer. The woman then directs him to another place where homeless people line up for beds. There, Chris and Christopher must wait their turn, hoping for a spot for the night. Fortunately, Chris and Christopher manage to secure a place to sleep that night. Even so, Chris refuses to waste a single moment. While his son rests, he focuses on repairing the machine so it can be sold again. At the same time, he studies relentlessly, determined to become the best intern in the program. During this harsh period, Chris grows used to surviving on just a few hours of sleep each day. A new routine takes shape. He arrives at work as early as possible and works at full speed, knowing that at 5 in the morning he must line up again just to secure a bed for Christopher. He even starts attending church regularly, simply because it offers free meals. Eventually, the day of the internship exam arrives. Chris feels confident that he answered every question correctly. On his way home from the test, another challenge appears. Mr. Frome asks to borrow $5 for a taxi after forgetting his wallet. With only a few bills left to his name, Chris still hands over the money. There are nights when Chris and Christopher miss out on a bed because they arrive too late. On those nights, they spend hours riding the train and sleeping there. To survive, Chris even donates blood for cash and uses the money to buy spare parts for the broken machine. One night, while Christopher sleeps, Chris works as usual, carefully fixing the machine with the parts he managed to buy. At last, it starts working again. The next day, he successfully sells it and earns enough money to last an entire month. That night, they stay at a hotel. After so long living in hardship, they do not even sleep on the bed, choosing the sofa instead. The final day at the office finally arrives. While Chris is busy making calls, he is summoned to the executive office. There, Mr. Fromm personally congratulates him. Chris has been selected as a permanent broker, and the next day will mark his first official day. Overcome with emotion, Chris thanks everyone in the room. He walks out of the office filled with joy, feeling that every struggle has finally been worth it. That afternoon, he runs to find Christopher and wraps his son in a tight embrace. All the pain they endured, being separated from Linda, getting evicted from their apartment, sleeping in a public restroom, and surviving countless hardships, finally pays off in that moment. After establishing himself in the firm, Chris goes on to found his own brokerage company in 1987. In 2006, Chris Gardner sells a portion of his company for millions of dollars. Today, he is a successful millionaire and motivational figure in America, having raised Christopher through nothing but determination and hard work. Remembering how difficult life was on the streets, Chris later uses his success to build a shelter for the homeless, turning his past struggles into hope for others. So the moral of the story is when life takes everything away, holding on and not giving up is sometimes the only thing that saves you.